You may have heard about the girl I'm about to talk about. She was all over the news after she stalked a guy, bombarded him with 65,000 texts, and broke into his house all after only one date. We met shortly after she went on that date with him, and we were friends for a while before she broke into his house. At first, she seemed like a nice, quirky person. I met her when I was spending a couple months on the west coast of the US in summer 2017. I thought she was cute, and we spent a lot of time together. We were living next door to each other for a few weeks, but we were never really more than friends. I stopped having any sort of non-platonic feelings for her after she started talking a lot about a guy she met on a dating website. She claimed he was her soulmate, and that she had somehow been guided to him by following her birth calendar. It wasn't until later that I found out they had actually only been on one date, and that he had never spoke to her again. I definitely thought this was weird, but I generally enjoyed our conversations, and she was funny and nice, so we remained friends. Eventually, she moved on and had some short flings with a guy and then a girl she met on Tinder, but all the while, she was still talking to me about this guy she was going to marry. She told me how she liked how jealous he got when she mentioned hooking up with other people. A couple weeks later, she started acting really erratic. I tried to confront her a few times, and she told me she had recently stopped taking her meds, but would start them again soon. One day, she came home and told me she had a court date coming up for a DUI. I still have no idea if this was actually true, but I was shocked when she told me her plan was to leave the country instead and go to South America. I told her what a dumb idea that was, and even though she ended up going all the way to the airport in a different city, she wound up coming back. Soon after, she told me that her soulmate was no longer answering her texts, and she took that as a sign that she should drag her ass back to him and fix their relationship. She was upset that he might be seeing other people, even though it seemed okay to her that she was seeing other people. Apparently, she had texted him and said that if he ever blocked her, she would know that meant he wanted her to come find him. Obviously, he blocked her, and obviously that didn't go over well with her. She moved a couple days later. The summer was ending, and I moved back to the East Coast. I didn't hear from her for a while, but we eventually started talking again via text and WhatsApp. She seemed like she was doing better. She told me she had found a roommate and was working on her art again, and just generally seemed like she was in a better place. I was happy to have my friend back and healthy, but that didn't last very long. A couple months later, her behavior started to seem erratic again. She was sending me dozens of texts at a time, and they were all over the place. Several of them had to do with this guy, her soulmate, and how she was still following him even though he had called the police and blocked her. I told her to stop and did my best to get her back on her meds, trying to reason with her hundreds of times. I was on the opposite side of the country though, and had no way of getting in touch with her family or friends. She was a kind person and a good friend when she was taking care of her mental health, but I couldn't force her to do that. I set aside some time to call her and told her that I was feeling overwhelmed and that she really needed to reach out to her family or someone who could help her. I have a hard time believing anything she told me after this. She said she needed to stay with me, or else she'd need to go back to her ex-husband. She was under the impression that he was going to have her followed or killed, and that he had the entire police force in his pocket. Apparently, he had even paid off her family to give him intel about her whereabouts. I had no room in my studio apartment for anyone to stay with me long term, and I wasn't even considering this option since she was starting to scare me. She somehow knew my address, even though I had never told her or put it online anywhere, and she wouldn't tell me how she got it. At that point, I asked her to leave me alone, and told her we couldn't be friends anymore, unless she took some steps to get better. Obviously, she didn't take this well. I hated my tiny, cramped apartment, but I had chosen it because of the great security. It was on the upper floors of a hotel, and no one could get through to the residence elevators unless security had their name ahead of time, and if they had a valid ID on them. After what happened next, I grew to love my little apartment and how the staff kept me safe. I blocked her phone number and blocked her on WhatsApp after our last conversation, and she had continued trying to text me from 4 different phone numbers, but I just continued blocking them all and never responded. I was walking home from work one day about a week later when I suddenly spotted someone who looked just like her across the street from my building. It was storming out and I didn't get a good look, but I rushed upstairs to my apartment anyway. Maybe I was just being paranoid. It was a big city and plenty of people have brown hair and glasses. I knew I was worried about her still, so I figured she was just at the top of my mind. But then, the phone rang. The desk was calling to see if I had forgotten to tell them about a visitor. My heart sank. I asked them who was waiting. They said she had just walked out when they asked for her name and ID, and I knew it was her from the way they described her. I texted a mutual friend from over the summer. We hadn't stayed in touch, but I needed to ask him if he knew what she was up to. He told me she had totally lost it and he had blocked her too. Apparently, she had gone back on the dating site where she originally met her soulmate and found someone who looked exactly like him in my city. It's a popular place for tourists, but there was just no way this guy had coincidentally come out here. On top of that, I knew she was well aware of where the guy actually lived. I took a page out of her book and used a text-free number to tell her she needed to leave me alone, and that I would call the cops if she ever came near my building again. In retrospect, I know I shouldn't have contacted her at all, but I was emotional and wasn't thinking clearly. She responded immediately and said she just wanted to know if I could help her find something. I knew what she was referring to, and deleted the text-free app right away so she couldn't reach me again. I should have felt comforted that I lived in a well-populated area, and I knew she couldn't get into my building, but I was still scared that she'd be able to find me if I took public transit alone, or was walking through a less crowded area to get home one night. An old friend of mine who used to work for the police drove or walked me home from work whenever she could for a while. She told me I should follow a report, even though they couldn't really do anything since this girl never actually threatened or hurt me. I knew it'd be best to have this on record anyway, but I was embarrassed, and again, failed to use my better judgment. I felt like it was my fault for engaging with her for so long. I knew she was mentally unstable, but I still tried to be her friend and help her. I ended up moving to a new city for another job and never heard from her again. I later found out the reason why. A couple months after she tried to get into my apartment, she had once again gone back to Arizona and was caught breaking into her soulmate's house and using his bathtub. They found a large knife in her car. Between that and the violent, incriminating messages she had bombarded him with, she was immediately arrested. I was 21 at the time of this story. I had recently become a police officer and was also recently dumped. As people in their 20s do, my friend suggested Tinder. I had the invincible mentality of a new cop, so I had no problem with meeting people online. Soon enough, I matched with a very good-looking, out-of-my-league woman. We chatted for a while and eventually set up a date to meet. She said we could meet up at her house since she had an open field nearby that was great for looking at the stars and hanging out. The night came and she seemed excited when I picked her up. She guided me to the field and it was just as nice as she had described it. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife. As we continued into the field, I noticed some really dim headlights in the distance. Then a van started driving towards us and pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from continuing forward. I told her to stay in the car and that I'd go say hi. I grabbed the flashlight I kept in the car and walked up to the driver's side window. There was a decently sized man sitting there, but again, feeling invincible, I simply asked him what was up and if he could back his car up a little bit. He was very polite and told me that he was the owner of the property and that he didn't mean to scare us. He said he had some trouble with poachers on his property and just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting anything. I felt a bit relieved and assured him we had only come to look at some stars and wildlife. He seemed fine with that and told me to have a nice date before driving away. I told my date what had happened and we continued on foot into the field. The girl was texting non-stop after this though. About an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, but this time at a really fast pace. We hopped in the car and I moved into a more defensive position. The man came close enough to almost hit my car, and my date hopped out and ran towards the guy. I knew immediately that I was fucked. I got out and commanded them to back up and get on the ground. Obviously, neither of them complied. The guy charged me and knocked me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and got up. I saw the girl grab a metal pipe from the van during the scuffle. She told me they had a gun and said that if I gave them my money and truck, I wouldn't get hurt. Of course, I said no. She started to cry and said they didn't want to hurt me, while the man headed back towards the car. At that point, I told them I was a cop and drew my concealed firearm while telling them to get on the ground. After a moment of shock, they finally listened. I was able to call 911 and give them my name and badge number, telling them I had two at gunpoint and needed backup immediately. While I was giving directions to the dispatcher, they both got up and started running away. With my stupid new cop mentality, I chased after them. I took off after the man who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for about 30 seconds before I heard 3 loud pops and saw a muzzle flash. My previous feelings of invincibility immediately went out the window. I ran like hell back towards my truck and peeled out of there. I went back to the area I had picked up my date and called dispatch again to have officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up were my sergeant and field training officer. I hopped in their car and went back towards the field, all the while listening to them tell me how much of a dumbass rookie I was. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut up and only come out of the car if they were getting shot at. They cleared the area before searching the van, where they found meth in the center console. What scared me the most about the whole experience was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale and looked horrified. When I took a look, I saw that there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, handcuffs, a bunch of rifle ammunition, and what looked to be dried blood. In the front passenger side, we found an AR-15 and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. Luckily, the stain in the back turned out not to be blood, but the plates were stolen and the van had been reported stolen as well. I still get shit about the whole encounter, but luckily no one got hurt. I will never use online dating again. I met a guy online recently that seemed sweet and kind. I set up a date for Friday and everything was going well, until yesterday. He messaged me saying he wanted to hang out tomorrow morning, and I agreed, thinking we would just go out for Starbucks or something. We decided on a time and I went to sleep with a smile on my face. This morning, though, I woke up to a phone call around 8 a.m. Surprised, I answered it, and it was my date. "Hey, are you up yet?" "I just woke up." "I don't care how you look. Also, your mom freaked me out." "My mom?" "Yeah, she saw me parked across from your house. She waved and I waved back and she was kinda creepy." "What time did you come over here?" 5:30 a.m. My heart sank. Obviously, I didn't expect that someone I was casually meeting for coffee would show up at my house first thing in the morning and wait for me to wake up. After I got off the phone with him, I checked my messages and saw that I had a bunch starting at 5 in the morning. The first one was a picture of my house with the caption, "Do you live here?" In the next message, he said, "Someone spotted me, so I moved," along with a picture of my neighbor's house nearby. I was freaked out, and I knew my mother and neighbors were probably feeling the same way. I started panicking and texting all my friends, desperate to see if anyone was awake and might be able to help. I got one reply in a group chat, but afraid I'd get some serious judgment, I lied and told her the situation was under control. I finally convinced myself to go out and confront this guy. "Hi, princess, how are you?" he greeted me. I noticed him on my neighbor's yard, as if he had been looking for me in their windows. Shaking, I tried to fake a smile and let him hug me. He then went in for a kiss, a wet, messy one with tongue. I was disgusted and didn't know what to do, so I nervously told him that coming to my house at 5 a.m. to wait for me wasn't cool. He gave me some excuse that he wanted to beat traffic and didn't want to drive while he was tired since he worked nights, so he just came over right away. I tried to see things from his perspective, but no matter how I looked at it, this whole thing was unsettling. I didn't want to upset him, so I got into his car and we tried to have something close to a regular date, but his behavior got increasingly weird. He kept trying to grope me and lick me, and even brought up marriage and kids during our first conversation. I had had enough, and managed to convince him to drop me off away from my house. As I was walking back, I noticed him following me in his car. I stomped back and asked him what he was doing, and he asked if I needed to walk home. Even more scared than I was before, I told him no and managed to escape. By the time I got back home, I was in tears and shaking uncontrollably. I texted him and said I didn't think we were compatible, and ended it by telling him to never come near me or my family again. Of course, in response, he told me that I'm shit. From that experience, I think I'm going to take a break from online dating.